The African continent is
Africa,
grayed out. No data, no publicly available data, unavailable,
or
right?
it's 5 years ago data.
Yes. Hello, healthcare enthusiasts, and welcome back to The Cure. This is the podcast where we're revolutionizing the business of healthcare in Africa, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Temitope Coker, and in each episode, I sit down with the people that are shaping the future of healthcare across the continent, from founders to investors to researchers and beyond. And our goal is simple: to infuse hope back into the narrative by spotlighting the progress and momentum that is already unfolding across the continent. At the heart of every episode is one key question: what does it take to revolutionize the African healthcare business model? All of our insights are powered by TC Health, your trusted source for healthcare and pharmaceutical insights in sub-Saharan Africa. So let's get into today's episode. Today, we're taking a slightly different lens. So we talk a lot about innovation within the healthcare sector. We talk about new ways of funding, new policies, new medicines, new treatments. But what about the bigger picture that surrounds everything? The truth is that healthcare doesn't exist in isolation or in a vacuum. It's shaped by economics and by data and by how capital moves across the continent. In one of our previous episodes with Dr. Nato, we actually spoke a lot about timing being one of the most important things that makes founders, startups, and businesses succeed. And in the case of telemedicine, the stars had to align in terms of internet connectivity, data usage, and other factors. And so one of the most important things for success is looking at the external landscape and seeing what needs to exist to help a business grow. So I wanted to bring in someone who lives at that intersection where information and data meets finance, meets investment. And my guest today is Michael Famoroti, co-founder and head of research at Stears, one of Africa's leading data and intelligence companies. Michael holds degrees in economics from the London School of Economics and has spent over a decade helping investors, policymakers, corporations understand African markets. Before Stears, he served as chief economist at Vativa Capital, where he built a reputation for turning complex data into actionable insight. And he's also the editor of two books, Pathways to Shared Prosperity in Nigeria and The Art of Central Banking in Nigeria. And so in this conversation, we're going to talk about the journey to co-founding Stears, what it was like leading the election coverage in Nigeria in the last presidential election, what their data is revealing about Africa's economic trajectory. But most importantly, we're going to ask, what do all of these macroeconomic trends mean for healthcare? How does inflation, how does demographics, how does capital and investment flows shape the way health systems will evolve? And what would it take to bring some of that data transparency into things like public health financing or health financing in general? So, Michael, welcome to The Cure.
Thank you, Temitope. So happy to be here.
Thank you. So, as always, before we get into the conversation with Michael today, I'm going to quickly paint a picture of where Africa stands right now. And please, Michael, feel free to jump in. I'm not a data economist by any means, but you are.
I trust you, don't worry.
So, we're going to talk about economics, demographics, and even healthcare outcomes, because this is where the story of data and progress that we're going to dig into really begins. And so if you would permit me, on the macroeconomic side, Africa is still home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. According to the IMF's latest projections, countries like Niger, like Senegal, like Cote d'Ivoire, like Ethiopia and Rwanda are set to grow above 6% this year. And across the continent, average GDP growth sits around 3.5 to 4%, which is still outpacing many higher income regions. But the more interesting story isn't just, okay, how fast are we growing or the speed of our growth, but what's really driving that growth. And what's driving that growth is a young, digitally savvy population, more connection in terms of regional trade, governments that are starting to invest in long-term self-reliance and independence. And we're seeing that happen in really, really tangible ways. So for example, a great example is the Kenya BioVax Institute. So this is like a state-owned vaccine manufacturer that was established in 2021. And it was created after they did a feasibility study in 2020 in the heat of the pandemic to assess whether Kenya could actually manufacture its own vaccines. And this was a key step as the country prepares to transition out of support from Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, by 2029. So for anybody who doesn't know what Gavi is a global initiative that helps lower income countries purchase and deliver vaccines at affordable prices. But as countries, their incomes rise, they eventually, quote unquote, graduate from Gavi and are expected to fund and manage their immunization programs independently. And so Kenya's graduation is on the horizon in 2029. And BioVax is part of how the government is preparing to stand fully on its own. As I mentioned, this was in the inception of the BioVax Institute was in the heat of the pandemic, where many African countries struggled to access doses while wealthier nations prioritize vaccine doses for their own populations. And so BioVax is really Kenya's answer to that inequity. Like, we are moving towards vaccine sovereignty. We are moving towards long-term health security for our citizens. Another example, which just happened yesterday in Nigeria, we're seeing how governments themselves are investing in innovation. So for the first time ever, the Nigerian government has become a limited partner in a venture capital fund. So backing ventures platform's $64 million seed fund through their investments in digital and creative enterprises program. I think this is a bold signal that government is starting to play a more active role in shaping the innovation economy, not just regulating it or funding grants, but actually directly co-investing in startups that are building the continent's future. I found that very interesting. And this happened yesterday.
Yeah. First of all, shout out Ventures Platform, one of the best. I'm unbiased. One of the best VC firms that we've seen operating in sub-Saharan Africa. Did see that. And I think just a bit of a clarification. The government has been investing in startups in different ways, primarily through the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority,
Yes.
Which is like the long-term vehicle that's supposed to manage like our basically our sovereign wealth fund. But yeah, this investment is important and is unique because of the way it was done and the entity through which it was. I think with things like these in Nigeria, with First, for me, the key thing is, okay, a First is great, but is it a pipeline, right? Because there are a lot of very fantastic VC, okay, maybe not a lot, but there are a number of fantastic VC firms operating in and around Nigeria with great track records. And one of the things that a lot of VC firms have been looking for is, can we get pools of local capital? And the government itself, I don't see, given the state of the Nigerian government's finances, I don't actually see it long term or in medium, short to medium term as necessarily a major investor. But what it is, though, is that it's a crucial first mover, right? It's moving is a signal to other pools of institutional local capital, like asset managers, insurers, and pension funds, that, hey, this is a safe space, this is a good space, and that's where the money is, right? And the hope is that, things like yesterday will help. The challenge sometimes is, there's a saying that God giveth with one hand and taketh with the other hand. One thing that the Nigerian government can do better is be a bit more holistic in its approach to things like this. What do I mean by that? On one hand, you're doing a good thing. You're investing in VC funds in myriad ways. You are de-risking investments for other local pools of capital. On the other hand, those same local pools of capital, you're coming around every week to say, hey, can you buy our bond? And we'll give you 25% annual interest rates, and it is risk-free, right? that insurer is going to be like, do I invest in this VC fund? They're selling me dreams about 10x and so on. Or do I just park my money in federal
just
government?
play it safe?
Do I just play it safe,
Yeah.
right? So again, the government does need to raise funds, etc. But a more holistic approach will help. And that's where we tend to sort of get a bit lazy, to be honest, because these things are hard and complicated, and it's not just about throwing money at it, right? But again, shout out Nigerian government, shout out Ventures platform, and hopefully we see a lot more public involvement in the private capital space. I mean, when Dr. Tijani got appointed as minister, it was seen as, or the hope was, this would really lead to a marriage between public sector and at least the startup ecosystem that had basically operated in sort of like a cowboy zone. We haven't seen enough of that. So let's, see if that changes as things go on.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, I think this is a very positive signal, but signals are signals. Since the start of Trump's second term, the dollar has depreciated by roughly 12% against a broad basket of currencies, including many that are in Africa. And so while many African countries do continue to be under pressure, we're not going to pretend that there's no currency pressure. The dollar's recent depreciation is potentially creating some, what I would call, fiscal breathing room and some hope, because for the African economies that borrow or trade in dollars, that's a pretty big deal. A weaker dollar makes debt repayments less expensive. It reduces the cost of imports, which from a healthcare standpoint, it means less expensive import of things like medical equipment and essential drugs. I think we literally just had our episode with Mrs. Fola Laoye, who's the co-founder of Iwosan Investments, and she had mentioned that a lot of our medical equipment, if not all of it, is imported. And considering, I think we discussed this with Charles in episode 1, between 70 to 90% of our drugs are imported. So when you have a depreciating dollar, it creates a bit of breathing room in what has otherwise been a really, really tough global financial environment. And you can already see that impact across different regions. So in the West African region, the CFA franc has strengthened by roughly 12% since the start of the year against the dollar. And this has been the biggest gain in years. And so has the Central African CFA franc. It's followed the same path. And even in Nigeria, where we know the Naira has had a pretty interesting and volatile run, we've seen a modest recovery of about 10 to 11% over the same time period, so between the beginning of the year and now. And so for governments that are managing health budgets, these shifts really matter, because every bit of foreign exchange relief means that you have more money to fund healthcare infrastructure, local manufacturing, essential medical supplies. It reduces the cost of importing medical equipment, medicines, and so it frees up more of that capital. And so for me, it's a reminder that sometimes the global financial headwinds can tilt in Africa's favor.
Yeah.
And when they do, we now need to take that opportunity to
100%.
to have that, channel that momentum in the right way. But I'm curious what you think, because obviously this is your bread and butter. I just saw it as a pretty positive signal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, right? Very much on the money in terms of, do we take advantage of this, right? Because the thing with the movement of the dollar, and God bless President Trump, is it's so linked to trade policy, to politics in the US. Honestly, a lot of these are not really economic. They're sentiments based off people's perspectives of how the US is going to evolve and how its relationship with some of its key trading partners and so on might evolve. And the reason that's significant is because in 3 months, we might be singing a different tune if President Trump is singing a different tune, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something we can control, and that's why it's so important that in the interim, while we have this relief that you mentioned, how to take advantage of it. Earlier on, you'd spoken about timing from one of your early recordings, and this is a great time for imports, but a bad time for exports, right?
Yeah.
Thankfully, when it comes to health, don't think exports are a huge part of Nigeria's health infrastructure, but definitely, as you said, on the import side, it's very hard to explain or to exaggerate just how much the dollar is the lifeblood of Nigeria's health ecosystem. Right. Everything is linked to the dollar. Right. Even a lot of local health infrastructure services are tied eventually to the dollar as well. Right. So it's a relief. The ideal thing right now from a macroeconomic perspective would be countries like Nigeria using this period to, as you said, tidy up some of their fiscal positions, and hopefully also, because we've seen a lot of imported inflation as well over the last few years, hopefully also use this as an opportunity perhaps to ease interest rates. But again, all this is also a bit dicey because, as I said, in 2 months we might be singing a different tune, and that then means you don't want to be yo-yoing. But in the meantime, it is definitely a positive. It's just, let's see how long it lasts.
See how long it lasts. And I find that interesting because I'm not I studied economics at school.
Nice.
But
So we have peers.
not about peers, but I always thought of, when I think economics or macroeconomics, I think in very rational, like the numbers tell it all. Like if this number rises because some other number has risen and then this number is going to decrease, etc. But this idea of sentiment playing a role in something so crucial to macroeconomic conditions, I've never really thought about it that way. But now that you say that, I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah, like in some degree, there's this idea that we're the whims, especially anyone who's really tied to the dollar, to, certain forces.
Yeah, I think every discipline or field has its secrets. That's why I like to believe, like, if you enter, then you're like, wow, so this is really how medicine or science or architecture is, right? Likewise for economics, right? So you're absolutely right in that the narrative, the perspective typically is rational and numbers and quantitative. And if you go to do a PhD in economics at Chicago booth, you'll be convinced of that because every day all you see is equations with Latin letters. And you're like, what is all this, right? It's super difficult, super crazy. But the reality is that macroeconomics is the study and application of people functioning within a broader society. And once you get people involved, every number goes out of the window. Right. The example that I'll use to illustrate this is, in theory, the beacon or the best example of efficiency and so on in economics is the capital markets, right? The stock market especially. Because when you see a price, if you see like a Netflix stock price is $3, then you think, okay, this is the correct price because there are thousands, if not millions of people trading on this stock. So surely, this is the right price. So if I buy it at $3, that's not the case, right? Just being frank. There are different people that have communicated this in different ways, but my personal favorite is, I'm not sure if I remember his name. I think it might be Robert Shiller from, this was either the dot-com boom or the 2008 financial crisis, where actually it might be him, it might be Kings, I can't remember, but someone used a fantastic phrase. They spoke about how the markets are driven by animal spirits. That sounds like a very Nigerian thing, animal spirits. But like, this was one of the most respected economists coming out to say, look, all these numbers, it's animal spirits that are moving these prices, are moving people's behavior, right? And the other example that I'll use is that there's a guy called George Soros, who some people might know is one of the dons of investing in public markets globally. And there's a joke about how, I think it was his daughter once, that after he gave like a big speech on like how to invest and how to make money, and everybody was listening attentively because it's like Buffett speaking. You want to learn how to make money. And she comes round and she says, don't listen to him. He wakes up, he says that his back is paining him, so he's going to sell that stock. That's how he moves, right? And the things, that's how a lot of macroeconomics is. There is the fundamental stuff, right? There are equations that help us determine what the price of the naira should be against the dollar,
Yeah.
right? And we call those fundamentals. Right?
Yeah.
But in terms of reality, those fundamentals are often layered on by lots of different sentimental and temporal stuff.
Yeah.
And some of them can be very watery, but can be very powerful, right? For example, today, I think the naira is about 1,450. There's no reason it should be that high. So when you think about the fact that 10 years ago it was 150, the economic situation, the numbers haven't moved that much.
Yeah.
Right? But before we liberalized the currency in summer 2023, speaking to one of my friends, and I was saying, and we done the maths, and we said,
Yeah.
look, we think the naira should land about 700, 750, if 600, if we're lucky, based off like the equation, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I was telling him, look, I actually have no idea where it's going to land in reality, because my expectation is that the market will punish Nigeria for the last 10 years of rubbish. That's it.
Yeah.
No fun. It just, you've behaved like this for 10 years and been a terrible country to invest in. Now you come back and say, hey, everything is fine. I'll come and invest. Come and bring your dollars. I believe you, but I'm wary.
Yeah.
So I'm going to price that in. How much I price that in, God knows, right? So that's why that's part of why we've seen such a jump, right? 2 years ago, the CBN would have told you, or the IMF, right? I remember when JP Morgan came out to say that the naira was going to be at 1,000, and everybody was like, you're crazy. Because I looked at the breakdown they did, and I was like, these numbers, they're stretching them. But
Yeah.
even they were wrong. Because the sentiment that came on top just threw
Just
everything
added
out of
it,
the
yeah.
water, right? So it's a very important thing, and it's not just an intellectual conversation.
Yeah.
It matters because when we then try and apply economic policy to different sectors like health, it's something that we often forget. You and I were speaking earlier, and you said something that made me smile about how some of the ways that we've seen local pharmacies thrive is how they thrive on the soft side of things.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just that they're selling drugs cheaper or so on. It is that they're building communities around them, right?
Yeah.
The person that walks in, the shop attendant knows their mother and knows their son. And those are sentimental things. It's sentiment, right? And when you want to set up a big hospital, you don't price that into any of your models.
Yeah.
You look at the cost and the margins and
Yeah.
this and that, right? And all of that is valid, but unless you understand the sentiment stuff, the soft stuff, whatever you want to call it, that translation from the model
Yeah.
or the maths to reality will break down,
Yeah.
right? And that's why one of the things I personally try and champion as an economist is we need to make sure that we're more honest about what those sentiments are, and we need to understand them better. Thankfully, there are growing fields that try and focus on that. Unfortunately, not much of that work is happening in Africa, right? So
Yeah.
we're still a little bit in the dark.
Yeah, no, I find what you said interesting because when I was learning economics in uni, you were always taught about the rational customer. And now it's like a lot of customer or consumer spend is emotional. And emotion is almost like the opposite of logic and being rational. And even yesterday we had our episode with Miss Fola Laoye, and she mentioned, I asked her what's one business principle from outside of healthcare, because she started out in financial services, that you would bring into healthcare. And she said the customer experience is something that we don't really focus on as much in traditional healthcare institutions, but it's a massive, massive factor. So I find that interesting how all these different themes are tying together. But on the financing side, we've seen that African countries are getting bolder, again, these are all my perceptions, are getting bolder about tapping regional and international capital markets. So, for example, Cote d'Ivoire recently returned to the international Eurobond market after a 2-year break, I believe, and raised around $2.6 billion. And the response was quite remarkable. They had over 400 investors that took part. The total offers exceeded $8 billion, and it became the largest Eurobond sale ever by a West African country, and a signal that global investors, to some degree, still believe in Africa's growing story. Um, and then the West African Monetary Union is planning to raise billions of dollars through its own regional debt market this quarter. Another signal that the region is learning to kind of fund its own growth on its own terms. And I think just shifting into the healthcare space, um, the shift is equally profound. So we're witnessing a quiet transformation. So after the shocks that came earlier this year of donor funding cuts, we're seeing governments begin to fill those gaps that were left by these external aid cuts. So Ethiopia introduced a new tax to offset USAID's funding pause. Nigeria's lawmakers approved, I believe, $200 million to close some of the shortfalls in U.S. health aid. South Africa announced some plans to boost its health and defense budgets to protect some of those critical services. And at the multilateral level, the Africa CDC is calling on African Union member states to increase their domestic health funding. And they launched the Africa Epidemics Fund in February of this year, alongside new partnerships with private sector, philanthropy partners. We've also seen the Africa Development Bank reshaping how health and development are financed. And they've proposed this African Development Fund, which aims to raise capital on global markets and build a stronger coordination with Afreximbank and the Africa Finance Corporation, all of which is aimed at more transparent and self-sustaining financial architecture on the continent. But I think on the digital side, I'm not going to go into this too much, because on the health tech investment side, yes, it's smaller than fintech, but it has shown some remarkable resilience even through some of the toughest funding cycles or funding periods. And if you missed our episode with Dr. Nato, please go back and listen, because we unpacked the scale of health tech funding and what new funding models are needed for health tech startups in Africa. So that was a very interesting discussion about, we've seen a lot of VC funding, but is VC the right model for health tech
Very
in
good
Africa?
question.
Yeah. And then one of the last points I want to raise is about one of Africa's greatest assets, which is its demography. So Africa's population is set to double by 2050. And it's adding more than 1 billion people. And by 2035, so the next 10 years, the continent will have the largest working age population in the world. So a few back-to-back stats. The median age on the continent is 19. Over 60% of the population is under 25, and nearly half of all Africans are under 18. So this is, by definition, the youngest continent in the world. And it presents like a huge opportunity for future development, future economic growth, if we can harness it the right way. And even on the flip side, we're seeing a hopeful story about healthcare outcomes and indicators. So according to the WHO, the life expectancy in Africa rose by almost 10 years between the 2000 and now. So from 46 years to over 55 years, the largest increase in any region in that period. And so, yes, we have the youngest population, but we're also living longer. And then just a few last points. In the same time frame, we've also seen more countries that are steadily increasing the share of their GDP that is devoted to health. So from 2000, the domestic government spend on healthcare per capita, so the amount governments are spending in sub-Saharan Africa on healthcare per person, has almost tripled from $30 to close to $85. Obviously, there is still a long way to go. I believe the WHO benchmark for that is in the hundreds. But this just proves that there is momentum that is pointing to a hopeful future. The trajectory is upwards. And so, yes, challenges remain, but I believe the momentum is unmistakable, and Africa's economies are growing more resilient. People are becoming more empowered. Its healthcare systems are becoming more homegrown. And that is where our conversation today fits in. So if we want to build healthcare systems by Africa for Africa, we have to understand the economics that are shaping them and how data can light a path.
Yeah. I love the stats you shared.
Mm.
Some really important perspectives. Couple of things I like to touch on. The first is when it comes to financing, which, because obviously I look at financing across all sectors across Africa. Health is one of the more interesting sectors because even when you go back to Econ 101, you learn something called externalities, right? An externality is basically the idea that in a typical private market transaction, like when I go out and I buy TomTom, I buy TomTom, I give the shopkeeper money, I take my TomTom. The cost of the TomTom, I bear it. That's I don't know how much TomTom is now, 20 naira. Everything has gone up. Let's say 100 naira. That cost is borne by me. The benefit of the TomTom is borne by me or the person that I give it to. That's a typical private market transaction.
Yeah.
When you buy shoes, when you buy perfume. An externality is a situation where either the cost or the benefits or both of that transaction is also borne by a third party. The classic externality is smoking, right? When I buy a cigarette and I smoke a cigarette, the cost is also borne by anybody inhaling third party smoke.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's why the government then says, oh, that's a market failure. It's a market failure because the market is supposed to price in that third party cost, but it doesn't. Because when I'm buying the cigarettes, it's between me and the shopkeeper.
Yeah.
So the government has to come in and say, hey, we're going to impose a tax that reflects the costs, right? So that's a negative externality. But there are positive externalities. And I think even globally, policymakers are better at addressing negative externalities.
Yeah.
And we're still a bit confused about positives. And the two biggest positive externalities for me are in health and education, particularly for Africa.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Well, classic example is vaccination.
Yeah.
If I go and pay for a measles vaccination, I bear the cost, I get the benefits, but everybody else unvaccinated that I interact with also bears the benefits because now they're not going to get it from me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when I go and pay for the vaccination, I'm not thinking about them. I'm thinking, is this cost worth it for me?
Yeah.
Right. So let's put this in numbers. If the cost of a vaccination is 100,000 naira and I price my benefits at 80,000, but the third party benefits in total are 50,000. On an individual level, the cost 100,000 is greater than the benefits 80,000 private benefits. So I'm not going to pay for the vaccine. But on a social level, the social benefits is 80,000 plus 50,000.
Yeah.
The cost is still 100,000. So on a social level, we want that transaction to happen.
Yeah.
So the question now is, how do you encourage those kinds of transactions to happen, right? And in healthcare, that's one of the challenges when it comes to both healthcare funding, when it comes to healthcare funding, healthcare policy, and then decisions private individuals make around healthcare, right? And it's why, for me, it's very important that, yes, we take a market-driven approach to healthcare funding, healthcare policy, and the way we think about healthcare decisions. But fundamentally, we know that that healthcare is a classic example of market failure. Positively, but in the sense that if you leave the markets, and by markets, I mean the funding markets, the market of people buying and selling healthcare, if we leave all these markets to function by themselves, particularly in countries like Africa, where you think about, continents like Africa, where you think about there's lower education, so people can't even process this can't process this properly. And particularly in countries like Nigeria as well, where I like to say we have a me and my family mentality. As long as we're okay, everybody else can crash and burn. You know? So it becomes very important to understand, okay, to get healthcare funding right, I need to bring the market, but I need to supplement it, right? To get healthcare delivery right and so on, right? So that's something that is super important on a fundamental level. What it looks like will vary depending on the situation, right? So that's the first aspect of that. The second aspect is that on the funding side, it affects bankability. Bankability here means I you come to me and you tell me that you want to build a hospital.
Yeah.
I ask, is your idea bankable? As per, can I make money off it? Right. The issue with that is if you're talking about building a laptop factory, it's fine. Is it bankable? If yes, I invest. If not, I don't invest.
Yeah.
But again, when you consider that with healthcare, we care about more than just bankability, the question then is, how do we catalyze investment that isn't solely donor funding?
Yeah.
Because donor funding has the opposite issue where it doesn't care about bankability.
Yeah.
And now I know I'm all over the place, but the reason bankability is important is for sustainability.
Yes.
Right. If it makes money, it's going to be there next year.
Yeah.
Right. So donor funding, and I mean, you mentioned it. One day we woke up and he who shall not be named, they said, no more donor funding.
The rug was ripped out from under us.
Right.
Yes.
And, there were horror stories of literally life support machines being turned off, vaccine centers being turned off, and all like crazy horror stories of just funding disappeared.
Yeah.
Right. So bankability is important.
Yeah.
But it can't be the only thing, right? And that's a challenge that everybody involved in healthcare financing, from governments to financiers to healthcare delivery experts, need to come together to solve on two levels. One is for each region, and that can be regional or country. There needs to be general governing frameworks that allow bankability to mix with other incentives.
Yeah.
But then it also needs to happen on a case-by-case basis, right?
Yeah.
We have seen positive case studies. There are medical centers that are part funded by DFIs, private sector, governments, pension funds. Each of those investors has a slightly different agenda.
Yeah.
Right. But the reason those projects thrive is because the person delivering on the project could deliver on everybody's agenda. Right. You don't take a non-bankable project and just take it to pension funds.
Yeah.
Right. You take it to DFIs and say, hey, can you help me de-risk this? When they've de-risked it, you can then take it to government and say, hey, I have Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I have British International Investments, I have Proparco. All these guys are willing to put $50 million of XYZ funding. I need you to support me with this little funding and this policy and this agreement.
Yeah.
Take all of that, you go to private sector, you go to a bank and say, hey, I have this, I have that. Can you give me a loan?
Yeah.
Right. It's that mixing of agendas, mixing of funding that makes healthcare financing for me interesting. As an outsider who doesn't have to solve it. Right? But from outside, it's interesting because it's like mixing a cocktail versus like just putting vodka and rum together, vodka and Coke together. Right? So that's, I feel, a really interesting thing. Like I said, in Africa, we've seen great case studies. I'll just close on this point on even the issue of, is VC the best model for health tech funding? My answer is that venture funding needs to be a component, because venture funding is the poster child for private market on steroids.
Yeah.
Like, that VC is investing in you because when they see you, they see a unicorn with dollars flying around your face.
Yeah.
That's what they see.
Yeah.
Right. And health can deliver that, but that cannot be the only reason we invest in health tech long term in Africa. Right. So it's like, where are we? What is complementing venture funding? Because one thing that a lot of people don't realize, except you've delivered on projects or worked on these businesses or you've been an investor, is that money talks, in the sense of your funder would determine the direction exactly.
Yeah.
So if it is Silicon Valley VCs that are funding health tech in Africa, the outcomes we get, the nature of health tech will be different from if it's a cocktail of people funding health tech in Africa, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so important, right? So that's on that. But the last thing I want to mention from what you said is on demographics. It's one of my favorite topics. And I want to dig into that word assets. Do you have a car?
Yes.
Is your car an asset?
Yes.
Okay, right. Let's see. Is your car fully paid for?
Yes.
Okay. Let's say you bought the car on credits, and every month you still need to pay 250,000 naira for your car
Mm-hmm.
to keep the car, else they repossess it. Is the car still an asset?
No, there's some liability that has
Okay.
come in.
All right. Let's say that every week you have to take the car to a mechanic for an oil change because it's just bad, and you have to spend 100,000 naira. Is the car still an asset?
Leaning more liability. I'm so curious where you're going with this.
No,
But
you already
leaning
see
more
where I'm going.
liability.
Let's say, I'll just skip to the end.
Yeah.
Let's say, thankfully, you don't have to take the car to the mechanic anymore. You still need to make those payments to the financier. But problem, the car no longer has an engine. So the car is just in the house. Is the car an asset?
No.
Now,
Can't
what is
drive
it?
It's a liability.
Every single 21-year-old in Africa, for me, is neither an asset nor a liability.
Okay.
Until we see if they are draining money or they're giving money, right? And honestly, it's not the responsibility of the youth to deal with that, but it's the sense that when we talk about the demographic dividend of a young population, there is an assumption that, hey, young assets, the same way people think car assets.
Yeah.
But a car can be a liability if it functions or fails to function in a certain way. That's the same issue. Now imagine if you have a fleet of 100 cars that all sit in your house and you need to be paying for them. You'll be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
In fact, the first thing you would want to try and do is think, how do I get rid of these cars? Now apply that to human beings and things start to get quite morbid.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, God knows how many people are in Nigeria. Like nobody actually knows.
Yeah,
Every stat you see is a lie. Nobody knows. Right? We don't know how many young people, but we know there's a lot. We know that there is a Nigerian born every, 12 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
That baby that is born should be an asset. But that baby is only going to be an asset if they're giving the tools and the environment to contribute to the economy and society. If they're not, and if the environment actually takes from them or imposes a cost from them on them, then what happens is you don't have a demographic dividend, right? You have a demographic time bomb, right? And that is true on a health level, right? One of the things I was looking at earlier this year was, I think is it in DRC? I know DRC has the Kivu crisis, but there was a disease X crisis somewhere in Central Africa. I think it might have been in DRC, where there was basically a bit of a pandemic, right? It was called disease X because when I was reading about it, people did not know what it was, right? But it was spreading like wildfire, right? Why? Because of population, living environment, etc. I remember when COVID first hit and there was that panic because you think about slums in Lagos, for example, and you think, oh my God, if one person gets this,
everybody
it's going to spread like wildfire. Now, thankfully, there were other things that prevented that, right? But it's a fair illustration of why generally, and especially with health, our demographic condition could either be an asset or a liability.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about how we, prepare these people, how we solve them. One of the benefits of a younger population is that you have a low dependency ratio in theory. So a lot of people working to pay off the health bills of older people.
Yes.
But if half your youth are unemployed, who's working?
Yeah.
Right. So I could go on, but I do believe demographics can be an asset for Africa. But what I would like us to do as a country and as a continent is to take a step back and actually accept, wait, let's not assume this demographic situation is an asset, yes, because if we do, we become complacent.
Yeah.
Let's realize that we have work to do to turn this from something neutral to an asset.
Yeah.
Right. So that's my perspective of that.
That's a very interesting perspective. And I liked the analogy of the car and asset versus liability. My retort or pushback to you is to ask, where is the silver lining? Where is the hope? How do you said a young demographic can either be an asset or a liability. How do we make it an asset?
Yeah.
What are tangible steps that we can take and obviously we being countries, we being probably government, to make it an asset.
Yeah. So, big question with multiple answers. I'll just share a few things. The first silver lining is that thankfully, at least I can speak for the Nigerian youth, as I'm one. Don't let my face deceive you. I'm very much a Nigerian youth. Thankfully, the Nigerian youth are not wired in a way where they're going to sit around and wait for help. There is a natural, actually, it's not a natural enterprising spirit. The environment makes people enterprising, because if you sit down, you die.
Yeah.
Right. So that means that already there is a readiness to latch onto any opportunity that is handed to them, legally or illegally, unfortunately. So that's a good thing on paper. Now, it then means that, to use that worn out phrase, it's about creating an enabling environment.
Yeah.
Right. In different ways. Right. One example, just to practicalize this, is that over the last 15 years in Africa, especially in Nigeria, we've seen the birth of a completely new industry, which is the startup or tech-enabled ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it has provided, it's basically a young person's industry.
Yeah.
Right? There are a few, egbons and madams, but it is a young person's industry. And the government has played a little role, but it's been private sector led.
Yeah.
Right. And there have been times when the government has done a good job of then helping accelerate things by creating an enabling environment. That sometimes looks like stepping in directly to be a financier. That sometimes looks like positive regulations. That sometimes actually just looks like backing these firms so that they have international credibility.
Yeah.
Right. So the central bank going with Flutterwave to California and Kigali and saying, look, we're behind these guys. So give them licenses, do them, right? So sometimes it can look like that.
Yeah.
But we've also had instances when you're like, government, is better if you had done nothing here. And that's when it's disappointing. That's when it's worrying, because that's when you are essentially undermining the opportunity, the industries that are being created, right? So the last example that I'll use to close, because it's more forward-looking, and an example that if I had money I would invest in, is leisure and entertainment. Because when you think about youth in Nigeria, from culture like partying to fashion to sports to media, it's like every young person wants to be content creator, wants to be there is a passion, there is a vigor, and Nigeria has cultural capital in all these areas. Yeah. Right. And the question then is, how is the government enabling people to thrive in these areas? How is the government setting up institutions to catalyze this, right? Because they don't need to build footballers or build fashion shows, right? But how are you enabling the people who are trying to build these things, create the jobs, creating the opportunities? How are you enabling them? And for me, that is the big question. That is a big thing. And it looks different. And sometimes when I get asked the question, I also like to point out, frankly, maybe this annoying people, it's actually not my job to tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
Also because I'm very wary of giving advice from outside, right? But as a policymaker, you've been in health policy for a year, or you've been in the sports ministry for a year, and you've not built an understanding of how to intervene positively, you're not doing your job, right? But when you build that understanding, and that's where obviously data comes in, when you build that understanding, then you can intervene, right?
Yeah.
So I've always thought that, look, if I were to, let's say be appointed as the chief TA to the sports minister of Nigeria, my first 9 months, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to do nothing. Because all I want to do is understand what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
What are the issues? I want to go to the grassroots. I want to understand things, because when I intervene, I want to make sure it works. Right. And oftentimes, I think with government, it's the opposite approach, where we value activity. Yeah. We value the ribbon cutting. Yeah. We value all that stuff. But a lot of time you build, you cut the ribbon for the sports complex. Oh, you come 18 months later and nobody's using it.
There's actually a Oh, where is it now? You know, when you're going to, it's like you're driving from Ikoyi to the mainland, but you don't go on the mainland bridge. You go straight
Yeah,
because you're
yeah.
going
Like
to
Surah and all
Lagos
that.
Island,
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
that area. In one of those roundabouts, there is I hope I'm getting the location right. There's a football pitch, really green grass, white painted lines. It looks ready to use. And I was driving past it once and it was empty. And then either right beside it or another roundabout, I saw a bunch of young Nigerian men playing football just in uh, the dirt. And it was literally like I could not make this up, side by side. And I was like, but there is a literal pitch right there that is locked, padlocked, and it's not being used right now. And there are these young men who clearly are passionate about football and they have to play in the dirt. And I found that very sad.
Yeah. I rarely bash policymakers because policy is hard. But at the same time, I often bash policymakers because they choose to go into it and then they don't even try. Right? The situation you described, I love it. Couple of observations. One is so Stears is a startup, right? And one of the things that we've borrowed from startup culture is in engineering, when you want to do something, you create a tickets, right? Because it's just basically this fancy word for saying you put like a document or something, a card that writes out what you're supposed to do and all that. And there's a very important, or the most important part of that ticket is the acceptance criteria. That basically means, what are the things that need to happen for us to say this has been done? Unfortunately, the acceptance criteria did not include delivery.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot in policy, particularly in Africa, where the acceptance criteria has been, that pitch was built, it has been launched, they've cut ribbon, and job done. And when they come to talk, they write 10,000 pitches launched, because that's the mentality. So we need to break that and move to an acceptance criteria where the job is done when the outcome we want is achieved, right? And that is harder because then you need to follow up. Then you need to ask questions about why people are not using the pitch. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and you and I spoke about this, I would not be surprised if the people who set up that pitch are not aware of the situation. I would not be surprised if there is one guy, one supervisor, who, when you ask the guys who are playing on the sandpit why they're playing there, they'll tell you things like, oh, the supervisor said we cannot use the pitch unless this, until like all sorts of rules and random things that you're like, oh, so that's why this is happening. And you not know and that's why I can't even think of something. It will be so specific, right? That you're like, oh, that's what we need to unlock for this to now work properly. And one of the most powerful examples that I remember is, and I don't know if it was a real example or just an anecdote that's general, but essentially about how there was a community that needed clean water. In all those classic stories of like President Jonathan said he trekked 10 kilometers to fetch water every day, etc. And then development guys came in and then blah, blah, blah. They built the best well that community could have, right?
Yeah.
And then they went away, and then 2 years later, and they came back and they saw that they were using the well for something else. And they were still doing the water thing. And when they dug into it, they realized that there were reasons behind that they had not even asked.
Yeah.
They had just thought, oh, water, well, bam.
Yeah.
They did not understand the local conditions, the preferences, the reasons. And if you want to intervene and solve a problem, you need to understand the things causing the problem. And they didn't. So they built a well, so the well didn't work, right? And the reason that is so important is because it still represents a lot of the ways we think about policy interventions.
Yeah.
But also even private sector. That's why a lot of businesses fail. That's why a lot of projects fail. And because asking the difficult micro questions are very hard, they're time consuming, But for me, they are extremely important. And it's also why I am a big believer in people who have done it before sharing their stories.
Yeah.
Because the reason I understand these things is because I've read and listened.
Yeah.
I've not done these things myself, right? But the more people share stories of how it worked and why it worked and why it didn't work and how it didn't work, the more the next person coming understands, oh, next time I need to make sure that I check this.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that I do this, right? And given that we have limited resources, particularly for health, it becomes even more important to do this, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Wow. It's funny, we have not even gotten into the questions I have for you today, but it has already been such a rich discussion. And I want to actually ask you about Stears, because you literally just mentioned when you and your co-founder were talking, I was like, okay, let's start the conversation with Stears and what your personal journey was like to co-founding Stears. What were the problems you guys were trying to solve? What were the gaps that you guys saw in the African data ecosystem that you decided Stears would be that solution?
Yeah. I'll try and keep it short so that I don't keep you here. Stears are taking on many forms. And I'm going to talk about me, Stears, etc.
Yeah.
Stears are taking on many forms. But the one thing that has, and in my view, will always be the guiding factor is Stears believes in data for decision making. That's it, right? 'Cause so much of what I've said is solved by having the right data, knowing how to interpret it, and knowing how to translate it into action, right?
Yeah.
And those are actually three different things because maybe I should save this for later, but I used to think when it comes to Nigerian politics and elections that it was a transparency issue. That if people knew what went on, that would change the electoral process.
Yeah.
And I used to think this for a lot of things in Nigeria. I don't believe that anymore. And I don't believe that about the world as well. And I think just maturity and life has shown me this. Like even President Trump has shown me this, that you can put obvious data point in front of someone that clearly suggests something and they will ignore it, they will rationalize it, all sorts.
Yeah.
And the reason this is so important is because we now understand that one aspect of our job is providing the data.
Yeah.
The other aspect of our job is making sure that the data is interpreted in the correct ways, depending on your context.
Yeah.
And lastly, seeing how can you translate this into action, right? Because if we just stop at providing the data, we are like those people who just built the well and went away.
Yeah.
Right. And the example that I'll use to just illustrate what I mean about how just providing data, doesn't change the world is almost 10 years ago now, I went into the Nigerian budget, federal government's budget. It was about 1,500 pages of tables. Yes, I had to do some of it for work, but also it was interesting. It's an interesting thing to know.
Interesting.
That exercise teaches you so much about Nigerian government.
Yeah.
And after I left it, I laughed. After I finished, I laughed because this was 2016. There had been conversations about budget padding. It's again an old phrase, I'm showing my age, where the National Assembly was accusing the executive of padding the budget as per the added things, and then the executive was accusing and the whole, and you go everywhere and everybody was talking about budget padding. I laughed because it was such people were fighting over it in bars and so on.
Yeah.
Laugh because I'm like, online, available to everybody is the unpadded budgets. And if you read it, you realize budget padding is not the issue. The issue is that the government itself is telling you, please government, forgive me, the rubbish it is going to do. And nobody cares.
Yeah.
You are seeing the Ministry of Transportation 2010 budget. 50 billion for rehabilitation of Lagos Awo Road. 2011, 60 billion for the rehabilitation of Lagos Awo Road. Up until 2020, 100 billion for the and every year we're saying okay. And you go onto the road and they are selling things on the road.
Yeah.
You go to the Federal Ministry of Aviation and you see 300 billion for construction of XYZ Expressway. Why is the Federal Ministry of Aviation constructing
an
road?
expressway, yeah.
You go to the Ministry of Education And the Ministry of Health, total budget 1 trillion naira. 100 billion of that to procure air conditioners, fax machine, trucks, and something. 200 billion. 50 billion medical initiatives to drive pharmaceuticals. I realize in black and white, these people are basically saying, we're going to spend your money how we want to spend it. I was like, and I wrote it, and this was also just a few years after budgets, because I don't know how popular budgets is anymore. But again, they used to make a lot of noise. I think now to them they're tired because they realize we shout and nobody listens, right? Budgets will come out and do all sorts of fancy infographics, presentations, go on TV showing this is how they are spending your money, and people are like, and I'm like, they are telling you like all the evidence
It's
you've ever
literally right there in
needed.
your face. Yeah.
Right. So, likewise, I'll just close with the elections. First time I looked at Nigerian elections properly was 2019, right? So I was around for the 2015 elections. I just observed when everybody was saying cyber, baba. I said, okay, no problem. Let's see. 2015 elections, in Rivers State, there were about can't remember the numbers exactly now, but let's say they were about 2 to 3 million voters. And President Jonathan swept the state. He took like 90% of the voters. Right. So let's say he got like 2 million and President Buhari got like maybe 200,000. Let's just say. I can't remember the precise numbers. That was 2015. Fast forward to 2019. What happens? Well, first thing is voter turnout, as we like to say, in River States dropped from, let's say, 3 million to about 1 million. Right? President Jonathan now wins like 60% and President Buhari wins like 40%. And days before the elections, you see pictures and videos of people fleeing parts of River States, seeking sanctuary because it is notoriously one of the most dangerous states right, during the elections. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is not rigging, but you've taken off 2 million Jonathan voters off the board. And the data is clearly pointing out. Like, or in 2015, you fabricated voters. But either way, the data is clearly saying that somehow voter turnout has gone from 3 million to 1 million in 4 years. That's not possible. We move on. The EU electoral monitoring body, because we work with them 2019, they do their fancy documents, evidence of my body. We move on. Right? So I could go on and on and on outside elections. So many examples of when the information is right there. People are like, yeah, cool. We just move on. Right. So now it's about, okay, how do we make sure that the data, that the information in whatever space we are gets interpreted and internalized properly and leads to action, right? And that's a very big thing. Right now at Stears, because this data problem is everywhere, we focus primarily on private investments, right? How do we ensure that entities, institutions, people who want to invest in private companies have the right information, can interpret it in the right way so that they know where to put their money, how they put their money, when they put their money, and so on. And these are entities like venture capital firms, private equity firms, DFI institutions, but even at times, so DFI is like the kinds of people who would want to invest in the health sector, right? And they're like, I have conversations where someone's like, I don't even know which health outcome to focus on. Right? I don't even know which region. I don't, so that's what we focus on now. The reason I joined Stears was, and the reason, so there's 4 founders. All of us at the same time got to the point where, when we were in the UK at the time, we were dissatisfied with the quantity and quality of information that we were getting about Africa. It was for different reasons. For some guys, it was they were trying to trade and they realized, I feel like I'm going to lose money because I don't have enough information sitting in London. For some people, it was, I'm trying to understand how to make the country better and all of this looks fishy. For some people, like for me, it was just everybody's lying. I read something and I'm like, this is so blatantly wrong or contrived that I don't understand it. I don't understand how this is the state of media, how this is the state of even consulting, reports. This doesn't make sense. The country will not move forward if this is the information diets that we have, right? So for me, for Stears, that was a very big thing. Like, oh, we need to prepare a better information diet.
Yeah.
The last 5 to 10 years has been a journey of us learning which parts of the diet to focus on, which people or entities to focus on, because there have been times when we've tried to help everybody. That's why earlier I told you, look, I've done someone health. I've done name an industry. There's almost no industry that I've not delved into. Information or data problems. We've done consulting, we've done products, we've done dashboards, we've done all sorts. But it was all a journey to understand a very similar thing that I've been talking about, which is ensuring that we can find a bankable way of solving this problem.
Yeah.
Because there is a version of Stears that just relies on donor funding, because we say we're solving information problem. And quite a bit of the work we've done on the policy and electoral space has been supported by our existing investment partners. Some of them are DFI type, right, in a sort of more grant-based way, right? So, but a lot of it has just been, we've just lost money doing this for the sake of the game, right? And there are no regrets there, right? Because it was very intentional. But now the journey is very much about ensuring that we can build bankable products, right? Because we need to ensure that the information that we're providing is here in the next 10 years, right? And for that to be sustainable, we ourselves need to be bankable. And that journey has been very fun. I can talk a lot more about, aspects of it, but generally it has been a 5 to 10 year journey of bankability where we've learned a lot about the information ecosystem in Africa, in terms of the users, the providers, the regulators. And now we, as I said, focus mainly on private investors, their advisors, ensuring that we can provide macroeconomic, industry, fund, other kinds of information that helps them make better decisions.
Yeah. And you talked about this information diet and creating that diet and some of the motivations for founding Stears, about how do you, like, people have data right in front of them, but don't use it or just don't even react to it in the way that they ought to. And, you've worked across economics, research, data infrastructure, the list goes on. What has been the biggest lesson to you about how Africans consume or trust data? Like, is there this inherent distrust of data? Or, I'm curious, what have some of your biggest lessons been about how we Africans are consuming or trusting data?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one that I'll then unpack is that Africans still underestimate the power of data. Hugely, right? And it's ironic because so many people now are excited about AI in different ways, but there's no AI without data.
Yeah.
Free. Like, the AI is just, it exists now because of the data that we've built over the years.
Yeah.
Through the internet, right? So, Africans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, South Africans, Rwandans, we still underestimate the power of data. And there's different ways that it manifests. One is that it manifests in us not looking diligently enough for data, right? Couple of examples. I'll use a fictional one and then a real one. Fictional one, on the private sector side, somebody wants to start a business and they go with vibes. Right? Now, the truth is, the way African economies like Nigeria are set up is that sometimes the market opportunity in front of you is so huge that even when you make 100 mistakes, you still cash out.
Yeah.
Because market opportunity is so huge, right? Whereas if you're setting a business in the UK, you have to make sure that your margin is 2%.
Yeah.
There's no margin for error, right? So that's why they value data. Here, you set up a restaurant, you say, VI now. Everybody puts their restaurant, right? Put my restaurant VI.
Yeah.
People like container. I do Asian fusion, just vibes, right? And maybe it works, maybe it does not work, right? And then you come back and say, government, you do not do any research to understand your customers, to understand competitors, right? That happens a lot, right? Second example, this is like there are things that I've experienced in Nigeria. I think everybody has gone through this, that make you wondered, this country, are we really a country right now? So I was in a meeting with a ministry official a few years ago, and can't say,
Obviously, yeah.
it was, they wanted, the minister wanted to go on a data drive and wanted to share a lot more data about the ministry, because there was a sense that people felt that they were not doing anything about it. So they're like, let's share data. And they came to Stears and they were like, hey guys, you are the data guys, right? Yeah, give us data, help us data. I'm like, okay. So we settled on a few things to test things off. We said, okay, we'll do some knowledge sharing about your industry.
Yeah.
We'll do some knowledge sharing about what you've been doing. So they said, cool. So we said, okay, we'll just send you a sample of some of the knowledge sharing about the industry that we've put together. So we went away, did some secondary research, put together like some fact sheets.
Yeah.
Gone on a call with an SA to the minister, a TA to the minister, and one of them was like, wow, this is fantastic stuff. Where did you find this data? And I looked at, I didn't look at them because thankfully my videos were off. But my man looking at it, I was like, I got the data from your ministry.
Oh my God.
I got the data from your ministry. A lot of the data was from your ministry. And I don't know whether they didn't know, they didn't care. Just, I was like, I didn't tell them that. Well, I'm like, oh, no problem. We have our ways.
Yeah.
We got the data from your ministry. The example that I will use, because it's funny and it's out there, is the CBN publishes all sorts of reports, right?
Yeah.
And there was a report that he published a few years ago, and they quoted a financial inclusion metric, and then they referenced Stears, and they referenced the Stears reports. That Stears report got that data from the CBN. And if you read the report, it's clearly there. I'm like, do you not
know that this is your data?
That is your data.
Yeah.
So there's and just the last thing that I'll say is that a lot of people actually don't like. There is not as much data in Africa as we would want, but even the data that exists, a lot of these stories that I've shared is to show that even the data that exists, we are not even looking for it as diligently enough, right? I had a conversation with a colleague yesterday where I gave her some review comments, and a lot of it was around, you need to bring more evidence for this research that you're doing. And she's like, the data is not there, the evidence is not there. And I say, it's your job, it's our job to be creative, right? And one of the things she was talking about, so let's say it was something like, is ESG becoming more important to investors? And you're like, where am I going to find the data? And I said, have you tried taking one major investor, looking at their, like, let's say their annual speech for the last 10 years and counting the number of times that they've used certain phrases over the years to map that trend, right? If the actual data showing ESG importance isn't there, you can't find a proxy.
Yeah.
Right. And we just don't understand even the power of that kind of data to even change the narrative, introduce conversation, right? So that's first thing. The second way that I would say that we underestimate the power of data is there's still the sense that Africa and aspects of African behavior and industries cannot be modeled by data. There's still that sense of, oh, if you're going into this industry, if you're going to the makeup business, no. It's not easy, you need to know this, speak to this influencer. If you're doing, I'm like, yes, as I've said earlier, every industry, every society, every aspect has nuances, sentiments that you need to understand. But everything is still data.
Yeah.
Right? Probably the most popular, and I'm very smug about this because I don't know how many other times in my life I'll get the opportunity to be this smug, right? The best example for me was when, for the elections, for the 2023 elections, we did the election monitoring in terms of the results. So there was a result. But we also, along with a few other people, there were also for the first time, there were a few public polls in terms of who's going to win the elections. Yeah. Right? Now, what was unique about the Stears approach is that we did a poll like everybody else, but because Nigerians were doing this silent voter thing where if you survey 100 people, 50 of them will say, I don't want to tell you who I'm voting for. And I'm like, I cannot predict who's going to win, right? So we did some modeling of people who had answered, blah, 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 to basically assign candidates to people based off their other answers, right? So we were able to say what, like 98% of our poll would vote for based off the poll results and our model, right? And there were two camps. there were two big camps. One camp was just fascinating. Oh, wow, this is so interesting. Oh, wow. The other camp that was funny was, you people, all these numbers. You don't know. In Nigeria, you don't know. This is Nigeria. And I was like, oh, my God. I understand. They'll talk about rigging. They'll talk about this. And what we had done was what I described before. One of the things that global literature in electoral polling has shown is if a very powerful indicator of who people will vote for is who people around them will vote for. Right. So one of the things that we asked was in our polls, who do you think your friends and family are voting for? Because if somebody says, I am voting for Peter Obi, and their friends and family voting for Atiku, and their other demographics suggest that they should be an Atiku voter, I'm a bit more skeptical about your votes. It's possible, but now I have quantitative reasons to model your votes differently from somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And my favorite, because we did some presentations, and my favorite slide was we did some visualizations where we used a gauge that went from 0 to 100. And we took every silent voter in our model, in our poll, and we applied our models to them. And each person then got a gauge in terms of your likelihood to vote for the three main candidates. And I could present a gauge of a random person and say, hey, look, this person's gauge for PO is like 20%. Their gauge for Atiku is like 40%. Their gauge for Tinubu is like 70%. And I show the gauge, and then I unlock the person's demographics. And you see how this makes sense. This person's a Muslim that lives in Kebbi, that does this and does that. And I'm like, okay, now I'm understanding that, right? So we did a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
Understanding electoral behavior, understanding what we call the voting value chain. Best example here is polls assess what people say they would do.
Yeah.
That's a problem, because as I said many years ago, the path from your intention to vote to your votes being counted in the polling units, and in fact in Abuja eventually, is fraught with peril. The odds of your votes slipping out are very high.
Yeah.
But those odds differ per person, per situation. So one of the ways we said we're going to account for this is one of the questions that we'll ask you earlier is, do you have a PVC? And the answers were yes, no, but I'm going to collect it. No, I don't have my PVC. Now, the interesting ones were yes and no, but I'm going to collect it. You then combine that with a question of, have you voted before? And some people say yes, and some people say no. Now, for me, somebody who says, I have my PVC, I voted before, is a lot more likely to turn up on election day than somebody who says, never voted before, I don't have my PVC yet. Because they might not collect their PVC. They might want to vote, and on the day, the voting process surprises them.
Yeah.
You had situations like there was a famous VGC one-off. They kept them there till 1 a.m. just to
waiting.
tire them out.
Yeah.
Because they know they're not going to shoot up VGC. So let's just tire them out. Right? People left. People who swear, I'm going to vote, they left. Yeah, they are human beings, right? So, long story short, we tried in different ways to model the things that people had in their mind that said, it is Nigeria.
Yeah.
Because for us, that's our job. So when the results were coming out, and as I like to tell people, we made 7 major predictions and we got 6 correct, including, for example, Peter Obi winning Lagos, that we got lambasted for that. Are you mad? Is it possible? Even me, sometimes I'll look at this, I'm like, I don't know, it's not possible, but hey, we've done the work, right? So it's like, for me, it was because I'd gotten evidence, sort of like certain situations, but it was the biggest scale evidence that actually these things can be modeled if you do the work, if you think about it in the right. Because a lot, like I say these things now so easily, but weeks and months of planning and thinking and me pacing around trying to changing my mind, lots of thinking and prepping went into it. But if you do the hard work, you can model it. And the truth is, if we're taking our results and giving it to an external party who wanted to make decisions on it, that person would have cashed out based off those decisions.
Yeah.
So it was worth it, right? So that for me is something I'm very smug about, because I am a firm believer in that anything can be modeled to some extent as long as you do the work to understand what is driving behaviors, right? A lot of people just don't do the work, and I find joy in doing that work. Right. So like right now, for example, we are working on, with a few partners, we're working on on metrics to track performance of the African venture capital ecosystem, right? And one of the things that interests me about that is, okay, what's the right way of doing it? What's the way that is reliable but useful, right? In a metrics that somebody can take in 3 years and make decisions on, and those decisions pay off. Those are the kinds of things that I believe are super important to help ecosystems, right? And it's hard work, but I'm like, this is what you sign up for. We're data providers, so we sign up for it. But again, as a policymaker, right, or as a business, if you don't know how to do it, hire, pay, consult. They are experts. Find the right one, because there are a lot of, but the hard work needs to be done. Else we keep going around in circles talking about how, we don't have the data, or the data is not, or the data lied, or the model lied. You got to do the hard work. And sometimes we will get it wrong. That's fantastic. We learn for next time, right? But 100%, we need, like, data infrastructure can help transform any part of this country. As long as it's giving the right priority and the right level of energy and resources is put into it.
Oh, okay. I have a lot of thoughts. I will whittle it down to one general theme, because I'm learning a lot from what you've said about how do we as Africans consume or trust data. And you had mentioned earlier that there is this emerging field of behavioral economics,
one of them,
to understand this idea that not all consumers are rational, and there's some sentimentality or nuance that your Greek letter formulas in economics tend to miss. And so that's one point that I'll come back to. But the other point of almost like Africans, or even maybe we stick to Nigerians, being like, you want to bring this data, but what do you mean? Like, what would this data tell you? Is it not just do this? Are we not just, don't you know that this can happen? I think, because in my mind, I'm always asking why? Because I'm always asking, okay, if you know the why, you can figure out how to change it. When you think of global data sets, and I do a lot of this research in my job with TC Health, etc., you often find Africa is left out. Except when it's about like malaria or TB or HIV, you will find the most up-to-date nuance. You even down to the local government area level, you will find those stats. But when you look at global data sets in general, you find that Africa is missing. And one visual way to even show this, when they show maps of the world of whatever metric, pick a metric, the African continent is grayed out, no data, no publicly available data, unavailable,
or
right?
It's 5 years ago data.
Yes. And so Africans are used to being left out of data. And so they aren't used to seeing their own unique experience reflected in data, which to me, I'm thinking is probably one of the factors, one of the many factors feeding into the why behind you give me data. I'm like, don't you know that there's all these things that, what will this data tell me? And to me, I'm thinking, obviously, silver lining, hope. I always like to point in that direction. That growing field of behavioral economics, etc. I believe somebody who won the Nobel Prize did something on behavioral economics. A woman.
Last year, is it Olson?
Yes.
Last year.
That growing field of behavioral economics needs to find its way to the African continent. People on the African continent need to start seriously exploring behavioral economics, because just in the example you mentioned of how different things were showing up in your electoral analysis and your polling analysis that reflects, yes, people tell you, don't you know it's Nigeria, but your data is reflecting yes, these are the nuances of Nigeria and how they show up in a data set. We need more of that so that people start to get used to seeing their unique peculiarities or that unique African spirit or Nigerian culture or Kenyan culture or South African culture accurately and consistently reflected in data. Potentially could lead people to trust the data more. Once you start seeing yourself more, you start to trust it more, because you're like, this is not just a situation where there have been a bunch of assumptions that have been made about my culture or my people because they couldn't be bothered to do the research. This is a situation where I see myself reflected in this data. And so the next time this data comes my way, I will give it a serious look, as opposed to just kind of pushing it away because I'm like, what's this going to tell me about myself? They never put me in here.
Yeah. Like, I cannot exaggerate how important what you've said is. Like, we learn, human beings learn through experience, right? If you touch a hot surface and it burns you, you'll not touch it again. You have learned. Nobody needs to tell you. You know. So you're absolutely right. For most of history, African data was provided by non-Africans.
Yes.
And honestly, it really reflected the picture or the reality. And that means that, as you said, Africans were confronted with data that did not mesh with their reality. So they're like, this data doesn't. And this is extremely powerful, and it's why we are so big on being African data providers, right? And it's why we are so big on ground truth data. It's not about having fancy statistics. It's about, how does this reflect the reality? That's why it's data for decision making. That's the acceptance criteria, because you can have statistics that, if they don't reflect reality, they're not good for decision making. So it's actually better not to use them, right? So that's a big part of why Stears is here. We believe that African entities have a big role to play in providing data that properly reflects African realities. And that in turn builds trust in data. That in turn encourages investments in data infrastructure. That in turn leads to better data that reflects our realities better. And that creates positive cycles, because that's how other regions and countries got there, right? And that's why the electoral polling work, I hope, so powerful, because now there's proof of concept that, hey, these things can work if they're done right. Right? So the next time somebody sees a poll and thinks, and says, Nigeria, you can't poll Nigeria, the next person goes, but Stears got it right. And the other person hopes is like, how did they do it? Right? So and this is true for like different aspects as well, right? Probably the classic example is, I hear a lot of Nigerians disparage inflation numbers, because they hear inflation at 22%, and I'm thinking, that does not feel right. I feel like I think it was late 2023, early 2024, when you felt like prices were doubling every month. Then National Bureau of Statistics to say inflation 20%. People are like, no, cannot be my inflation right now. So there's a couple of things wrong there, right? One is, like, you're providing data that people don't even understand. Right? So it's useless, right? That goes back to that thing of provide data, make sure it's interpretable, right? So government entities don't really do well helping people interpret data and understand that, right? Second thing is that even the data, the credibility of the data collection and cleaning and analytics process sometimes is flawed, right? So you come out with bad data, right? So these are things that need to be addressed. And just on the subject of data in Nigeria specifically, one area that I'm hoping for progress is with our national statistics, because we had a golden era of that, actually, in the 2010s, when Dr. Yemi Kale, who now I think works at Afrexim, if I'm correct, or ECOWAS, he led the National Bureau of Statistics, and it's a relatively small role in government, actually, but he became a very prominent guy because he transformed Nigeria's data infrastructure and got it to a point where people could actually trust the data and use it for decision making. But it took a lot of work. Took a lot of skills, because he's a brilliant man, but it also took a lot of opposition, right? And the reality is that a lot of people were upset, right? And when he left, a lot of things have sort of gone back to how they were before.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes this is as simple as when you provide information on like trade statistics or inflation or whatever it is, do you provide it in a picture? In like, you can upload a PDF as a picture, so you cannot even copy.
Oh my God, I hate when I get a data set that I can't copy. I'm like, so you expect me to go through the rows and rows and pages manually in this 2025?
It's intentional.
A country in Africa, their regulatory website, so you can imagine, is upwards of sometimes 100,000 different drugs. And Nigeria, you can download it. I was very happy. I was very pleased. I could download my Excel. It was great. There was a certain country that it was not downloadable. And so I had to go page, but I got through maybe 25 pages of 310. At which point I was like, it's going to take me literally like probably 4 months to do this. And so I had to teach myself, ChatGPT had to teach me how to use Python to then do it like automatically. But I was like, I could, if I wasn't determined to get this and I didn't have the time to do this, I would have stopped there. So it's like a barrier to assessing the data. Yeah. So it's like, it really grinds my gears.
No, like
it really does.
I sympathize with you, right? Things like this matter.
Yeah.
Because if data is accessible and accessible in a way where I can even sort of interrogating myself easily, I can understand it easily, then I trust data more. But if it's just mystified and it's almost grayed out, then I trust it less. Also, if people are honest about data and use it with integrity, again, people trust more. But when you have situations where, I like to use ministers a lot. I don't know why. You have a minister, let's say you have a minister that comes out and says, in the last 2 years, my ministry has raised $3 billion, right? And everybody's clapping at the event. And then you go to the ministry documents and you see that they've recorded 500 million. And then you start wondering, okay, who should I believe? The minister or his ministry? Yeah. Right. Or you see sometimes people just stretch the truth a little bit. So one of the, a friend and I, we have different mental models for understanding how Nigeria works.
Yeah.
One of them is something that we call a game of numbers. The idea that Nigerian policymakers are aware that generally the country is a bit quantitatively illiterate. Not because Nigerians are problematic, but because actually human beings, our default is to struggle with numbers. Like if I ask you, and you're a brilliant woman, but if I ask you certain questions and you don't think I work properly, you're going to get them wrong, because numbers we don't process them as easily as stories.
Yeah.
Right. So, and when you then add in education, media, all sorts, so they capitalize on that by mudding the waters with numbers. Right. And it means that if you're actually trying to understand a situation by following the narrative, the numbers will actually confuse you rather than help you. Right? So that's why it's sort of a game of numbers. And it can be something as simple as, one of the best questions I ask is, how much oil does Nigeria produce a day? That answer there's 10 answers to that question, depending on where you go to and who you ask in government and for what reason. Data is powerful. Numbers are powerful. Somebody in one corner is quoting the number back to their colleague saying, but the government said this, but McKinsey said this, but this person said this XYZ number. So people know that numbers are powerful. So they use those numbers. Yeah. Right. And that does affect trust, does affect understanding, right? So we actually do also have a role as citizens to call out entities when numbers are fishy. Like I feel like we tend to just take things, right? And we don't interrogate them. And we can start from our domain, right? Because sometimes, because you're an expert in that domain or you understand that domain, then you are better able to interrogate what the government says. But if I'm speaking to the creative minister and she's talking about like fashion and stuff, I'm just going to be listening to her because I'm like, I don't know the industry. Right. But there are people who do know the industry and are they challenging narratives? Are they
Yeah.
challenging numbers that are misleading people?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a big, so first thing, just going back to what you said about people need evidence of numbers and data working out for them to
Mm-hmm.
trust them more. But then secondly, like, we need to accept that not all of this is just happening. Some of it is intentional. There are vested interests in private and public sector who use data and
Yeah.
data literacy in their favor, and that's something that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Right. One of the funniest things that I saw during the electoral polling is the best way to counter a credible poll
Mm-hmm.
is just to set up 5 other non-credible polls that look like the credible one. That's better. You don't need to say, don't come and say, but just because people look like there's just a bunch of them together. Oh, those things are rich. I remember seeing a poll that said they surveyed 20,000 Nigerians. So me and my colleague were just laughing because we're like, this poll was done by a politician and he knows what he's doing. The goal of this poll is to undermine trust in other polls.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Nothing else, right? So it's like, these are things that we need to deal with somehow. You know? But again, just bringing it back positive for us, Stears is not our mission, because our mission again is sustainable data. But we know that as we do so, we give public and private entities examples of data working out for them.
Yeah.
But we also are changing the culture and building people's understanding of
And trust.
data and trust in data. And
Yeah.
that's a big thing. We stole our slogan from a guy from many long time ago, but it's like, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. Right? And that is the culture that we're trying to share with everybody else, to show how much we trust it. As I God, data.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Do you have any experience with health data, with Steers or other experiences? But also, you guys are tracking quite a lot of these indicators, inflation, maybe FX pressures, maybe debt, maybe GDP, maybe other more capital-driven metrics. What are those saying about healthcare? What are those saying about the environment that healthcare in Africa operates in?
Yeah. One of the facets of healthcare data in Africa is, what's the word? It's in silos. It's disaggregated, it's in silos. And one thing that people need to understand about data is that the power of data grows exponentially based off quantity and connectivity. So not just more data, but data that can speak to each other, right? And it becomes exponentially more powerful. So not linear, exponentially more powerful. And that's why data sitting in silos is so problematic. One of the companies that we worked with many years ago was Helium Health, right? And they focus on digitizing public and private health records. And that's an example of something very powerful, something very important, because, you have literally, I remember going to hospitals like in the 90s, during that 2000s. I'm not that old. And you just see these stacks and
of
stacks
papers. Oh, I've interned at some hospitals. First of all, they have to have ACs blasting in those rooms so that the paper doesn't disintegrate. But it smell, when you walk and you smell old, I love the smell of old paper, but it's like stacks of records. And this was, I might expose my age, but this was
late 2000s.
It was like late 2000s or even early 2010s. And I was like, wow, who's going to tackle this? Like, how do you even know where anything is? But yeah, continue.
Now, imagine we went to every single private and public hospital. We took all those files for Nigerians.
Wow.
We digitized them. And we built a health-specific AI for Nigerians, built on that data, and then other things as well.
Yeah.
Because Nigerians today are going on ChatGPT to ask questions.
Yeah.
Thinking ChatGPT is God. ChatGPT is based off data that it's been trained on.
Yeah.
As you pointed out earlier, only a fraction of that represents or reflects Nigerians.
Yeah.
So we're sitting on all this health that, because the thing with health is you don't need to go out of your way to collect health data. It happens naturally when people go to hospitals, when people go to pharmacies, or like health data gets. So the challenge then becomes making sure that you're storing it in a way that you can leverage. Right. And unfortunately, one of my big lessons from working in health data in the last 10 years or so is regardless of where you look, which region, which entity, which area of health, all of them still face that problem of there's stacks and stacks of sometimes digital, but oftentimes physical data that sometimes the entities themselves don't even know they're sitting on them, which again goes back to that my example of a ministry that doesn't even know. So it's like, and again, the reason that is so problematic is that this data that even exists already, if we can just bring it together to get them to speak to each other, there's so much we can learn. There's so much we can do. So that's sort of the first thing. The second thing is, and I think you mentioned this, a lot of our data outside medical records is provided by international bodies. Either when they're doing global studies or through like NGO projects and DFI projects, right? And me, I like international money. Please, we don't have enough money on content. Bring your money, bring your expertise, right? But it does, again, raise many questions about sustainability, about agendas, right? If everything is tied to a project NGO, then again, how are things speaking to each other? How is the state's government? How is Kaduna State learning from all the NGO projects that have been done in health in the last 5 years in Kaduna to leverage at least part of that data? What are the data protection rules? So like there's, with health, yes, there's more data to collect, but for me, the primary issue is the data that we're collecting, the data that is existing. How are we leveraging it? How are we storing it? How are we getting it to speak together? How are we getting it to tell us the right questions to ask and so on, right? So that's a really big facet of it as well, right? And just the third thing is that there's something that I sometimes say, which is that Nigeria is not a country. Essentially, that is, it can be a country on paper, but for certain instances, you have to understand Nigeria from a frame of, okay, it's a combination of different blocks of things, and I need to treat each block different. Health is chief amongst them, right? Health outcomes, health infrastructure, health data, health everything is so different in different parts of the country. If I just draw a line between the north and the south in terms of health in Nigeria, it's like two countries. From behaviors to data to infrastructure to like, it's just two different countries. And it then raises the question of how does policy handle that? Particularly in a country where you have all sorts of things like ethnicity issues, fiscal fragilism, so how do you handle the heterogeneity of health specifically? And that's linked and that's because there's just so many differences, because health is a product of like culture, environment, and all these things, and these things are so different in different parts of the world. So if you think you understand health because you've lived your whole life, health in Nigeria because you've lived your whole life in Lagos, so you've gone to a mainland island, but you understand health in a part of Nigeria. Maybe at best 8 or 9 states. Right? There are states that you have no understanding. Their health infrastructure, like it's a whole different ballgame. Like there are states where the issue is tuberculosis, cholera, right? Okay, let me not generalize. Not states, but there are parts of the country where the health issues are so basic that thinking and talking about something else is just silly, right? But at the same time, we have to move all these pieces together at the same time, right? So that for me is a big lesson, right? And then the fourth thing, this picked up during COVID. The fourth thing is health financing, especially, is something that needs to be addressed urgently, right? Africa got lucky during COVID. It got lucky, right? Africa did not have the infrastructure to receive the number of vaccines that it would have needed to inoculate even 5% of its population. It did not have the cold storage facilities. There were instances of, by the time you go to Ogba to put the vaccine, it was going to expire next week.
Yeah.
Right? Or by the time they opened it, it had spoiled because of it. So and that is just one aspect, cold storage.
Yeah.
That when you think about health and pharmaceuticals, if you're not in the industry, you might even think about something that matters like cold storage. But you cannot have a thriving pharmaceuticals industry without some level of cold storage infrastructure.
Yeah.
You then turn to cold storage and look, let's even see in Nigeria, what's going on in the cold storage space? I realize, again, there's a lot of fragmented things. I know there was a recent company, Coolbox, that raised $6 million. Aroa Capital led it, but I'm like, $6 million, a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
Right? You look at countries like South Africa, that their cold storage infrastructure is over 100 times, I'm not exaggerating, over 100 times more than Nigeria and more than anywhere in the continent, right? So that understanding that we have this population, this infrastructure, we are vulnerable to certain kinds of health issues or health situations, and we need financing to address that before we're afflicted. I think people understand it, but yes, unfortunately, we're not enough is being done, public and private sector, yet to address this, right? And we've had a few scares in the last 20 years between COVID again, which we're all lucky. And then of course there was Ebola.
Yeah.
You know, and the funny thing about Ebola is that the legacy of Ebola is still visible in Nigeria. You go to places and you still see sanitizers latched onto. Obviously, you pour the sanitizer and you say that it's like tiny alcohol, like diluted with water. And I find that so ironic because for me, it reflects the reactive nature of how we think about health. Because when Ebola came, everybody was moving. If you shake someone, you'll slap your
hand sanitizer everywhere.
Everybody was so extreme. Ebola came, it passed. We're forgetting to remove the hand sanitizers because but we have all this time. And if we forget to remove the hand sanitizers, it means we're not preparing for the next issue. Right? So, you've spoken about some of the other people you've spoken to about, genome sequencing, this, that, and those are the people who are preparing for the future, who are trying to solve futuristic problems. And I think, again, these things are important because in as much as we need to solve the choleras and cure people from malaria and, stop female infanticide and all these basic health things, we also need to understand that, look, like we are on a continent that we do not have the resilience to serious health situations, and we need to build it. Right. And again, the data speaks to it so clearly. But again, we see the data, we say, okay, and then we move on with our lives. And we pray to God every day, every week at church and in the mosque that everything will be okay.
Yeah. I wonder if, and this is just for the data nerds, right? If there are any specific indicators or proxies that you have seen move or trend in a certain direction that could mean something for healthcare, that could mean something positive for healthcare. I'm just thinking how the whole idea is that healthcare does not operate in a vacuum. Like we saw with the currency depreciation of the dollar, for example, that has implications for healthcare. When we think GDP growth, that has implications for healthcare because that could impact health spend per capita or percentage spend of GDP on health. So I'm curious if there's any signals or proxies that have been trending in a direction that you think can be capitalized for healthcare.
Yeah, so you flagged a good one, which is the exchange rate, right? So I think, again, for the data nerds, for the healthcare nerds, the two areas that I'll look are signals that tell you something about healthcare financing. And then signals that tell you something about healthcare delivery and healthcare access. Right. On the financing side, it's what are the indicators saying about how bankable healthcare is in the short term and the long term, right? Exchange rate is the obvious one because, as you pointed out, a lot of our equipment things, etc., are still
Imported.
imported, right? But another simple one is even immigration statistics, right? Because you still need health professionals,
Yeah.
right? And I remember there was a few years ago where there was a huge furor about how the proportion of the number of doctors that get licensed each year, the proportion that was leaving the country,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And governments are threatening that they will stop you and all sorts of that. But again, that is a leading indicator of the quality of healthcare delivery in the long term, right? Because if 20% of your healthcare workforce is leaving, chances are they're not the bottom 20%. They are probably part of the top 40%. That tells you something about the quality of your healthcare delivery.
Yeah.
If you are seeing decent immigration into Nigeria, particularly from people who are Nigerian and have lived abroad, maybe schooled abroad, spent time abroad. Again, that's an interesting indicator because some of them are in healthcare, right? What are they going to do in healthcare? Are they going to, like, you look at, for example, in Lagos in the last 10, 15 years, and a lot of the initiatives, whether it's health techs or medical centers, whatever, a number of them have been started by people who moved back to the country in the last 20 years from abroad, and they came with all their best practices and all their will to change and all that, right? So again, immigration sounds like something that is far away, but these are indicators of the long term, right? And then also just very directly, inflation, because there's something that we used to say in the startup world, which is, particularly in Nigeria, if you're a consumer facing startup, so you sell a product to consumers, your competition is food, because most Nigerians, take out the top 5% income group, 90% of what everybody else spends on is food.
Yeah.
So that 10%, everybody, from healthcare to transport to
everybody has to compete.
Everybody has to compete with that. So the size of that 10%, if it's increasing or decreasing, tells you a lot about what's going to happen in terms of healthcare behavior.
Yeah.
Tells you if you're going to have situations where, so like if a medical professional is asking me, oh, I run a medical center in Enugu, blah, blah, how do I predict demand for my services, for my hospital in the next 5 years? The first thing that I will ask is, how do you think income in this region is going to grow in the next 5 years? Because if people don't get wealthier, they're not going to come to your hospital and spend on the drugs and the consulting. It's just not going to happen, right? So because healthcare is still a necessity, but it's still competing with the non-food necessities, a lot of healthcare behavior is income driven. Is driven, so a lot of trying to understand how that changes over time and how that will change goes back to, how do you think the economy is going to improve and how do you think people's pockets are going to improve, right? Whereas on the financing side, it's how bankable are things, right? So if you see interest rates rising, then it's like, are people going to be able to get the debts they need to finance projects, right? If you see the exchange rate going crazy, then are these projects going to be sustainable, right? So the indicators are these, just some examples of things that tell you something about how bankable healthcare is long term, and how consumer behavior will evolve long term, because that also affects bankability.
Yeah. And so in all those metrics that you mentioned, so currency depreciation or appreciation, immigration, income growth, all of these things, are there any specific regions or countries where, like, is there anywhere where we're seeing a positive trend in some of those metrics?
Yes. Well, I mean, most of these metrics, funny enough, when you look at Nigeria and larger SSA countries like Kenya, Ghana, and so on, a lot of metrics are trending up.
Okay.
Right. Partly because the last couple of years have been rough for most African countries. So like we're coming off a bad base, but hey, it's better to be going up than going down. Right? Let's be real, right? So I think what I'm more interested in is looking for metrics that suggest structural change as opposed to cyclical change of, oh, things went down, now they're coming back up, right? So transformational metrics, right? In that regard, for me, the first thing I look for is the state of government finances, the state and structure of government finances. Right? Because for a couple of reasons, right? One is there's a big question that people in the financing and economics world ask about: what role is government supposed to play in financing healthcare?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you hear, I mean, this is not an African thing.
Yeah.
There's a big thing in the US.
Yeah.
It's a big thing in UK. It's a big thing everywhere in the world,
Yeah.
right? And it goes back to that thing I said about healthcare being a positive externality. So
Yeah.
if you leave it to the market, you know, so it's a
Mhm.
complex thing, right? But the challenge that African governments have is they don't have a choice because most African governments are fiscally constrained,
Yeah.
right? So they are at the mercy of external parties, private sector, and so on. So their biggest lever then tends to be policy, right? But as fiscal structures change, as we get to the point where Nigeria, Ghana, and co are not spending 60% of every dollar that they earn on servicing their debts,
Yeah.
as we get to a point where 80% of government spending isn't on salaries and wages and paying pensions that you owe from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
As it gets to a point where governments are fiscally unconstrained and look like they have the capacity to make more complex fiscal decisions, then we can then start to ask questions about, okay, how can the government play a more active role in healthcare financing? Not just throwing money at things, because that's what tends to happen now. Now, with the little money you have, government just throws that in and goes away, right? But how do we make sure that this money is catalytic?
Yeah.
If I were a government official in health, that's my magic word. I'm here to catalyze because I need to put $1 in, and that dollar generates $10 from elsewhere.
Yeah.
Else, I cannot close any of the gaps I'm trying to close, right? So for me, in terms of indicators that I'm looking at long term that can suggest structural changes in healthcare financing and delivery in Africa, it's the state of African government finances and the room that they then have to make more sophisticated interventions in healthcare financing, because right now that's don't really have that room.
Yeah. And now that you speak about government, I wanted to talk a bit about health financing and a recent kind of policy that we've seen. So there's a lot of conversation about a recent red letter published by the Federal Ministry of Health in October about dispersing funds to primary healthcare centers. And so before we get into it, I wanted to give a bit more context. So in the country, there are roughly 30,000 primary healthcare centers. Not all of them are fully functional. In fact, studies and even some of our own TC Health analysis have shown that only about 20% are truly operational. And not all of them are funded through the same mechanism. So only about 8,000 of them are currently enrolled under the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, or the BHCPF. And the idea behind the BHCPF is to ensure that every Nigerian, especially those in rural or underserved areas, can access a minimum package of essential healthcare services. And it does that by channeling federal funds, specifically an annual grant of at least 1% of the federal government's consolidated revenue fund. But they also have other funding sources like donor partners, private sector. And it channels those funds to a number of areas, including those 8,000 eligible primary healthcare centers. And so recently, the government announced that 32 billion naira has been dispersed through this fund and going to each of the primary healthcare facilities. And it was really a call to action. The Minister of Health was really galvanizing citizens to get involved with monitoring these funds, because there are mechanisms in place that at your local government or even lower denominational areas like healthcare centers, there are mechanisms where citizens can be involved in the decision making. Citizens can be involved in governance, right? So the Minister of Health was like, we've dispersed these funds. We're telling you all we've dispersed these funds. This is a call to action to get involved in decision making, how these funds are spent, because it's all kind of decentralized, etc. But it raised some questions about, well, how much is each center getting?
4 million naira.
If you did the math.
Yeah.
How are those funds being used? How can citizens even begin to be held accountable or hold anyone accountable if the information isn't transparent? We know that 2 billion has gone out, but we don't know exactly, is it being spread out equally? Is there a way that, there's a lot of questions, and it raised the point about, yes, this was a call to action, which I deeply respect, because I do feel like civil action is something that a lot of Nigerians, we need to do more
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Obviously, there are very valid reasons why it hasn't been as high as it should be, but I really respect this call to action. But how can citizens participate meaningfully if they can't see the data? And as somebody who's all about the data, I'm just curious, given your experience, right? I would love your take on this. Like, what would it actually take to build that level of visibility in public health financing? What would it take? What kind of data infrastructure would be required to track in real time how funds are allocated and spent across 8,000, potentially 30,000 facilities?
So like when you were speaking, I started doing the math because I mentioned the thing about a game of numbers.
Yeah.
Once I heard 32 billion, I said, okay, it's 4 million naira. I know you say that some of these places are really bad, but hey, look, even with that,
Yeah.
I don't think the answer is actually data infrastructure.
Mm.
I think it's culture change,
Mm.
right? Because first thing is, as a citizen, you need to be dissatisfied with the fact that all you have heard is that we have disbursed 32 billion naira to 8,000 primary health centers.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that a lot of Nigerians hear that and think government is working.
Mm.
And if I'm the government, I'm like, cool, that's all. Okay, cool. Let me enjoy what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Even the basic question you asked of, okay, how much does this primary center get? Are people asking it? Because then the government thinks, okay, maybe Nigerians are no longer happy seeing things at the aggregate. Because the thing with Nigerians, that if you aggregate anything, almost anything sounds big. Because all our numbers are big, our people, our currency,
Yeah, we're a
everything's
big
big.
country.
32 billion. Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you start breaking things down,
Yeah.
which health centers, which regions, how many people are those health centers supposed to reach, right? There's a very popular in the private market space. There's a very popular entity called British International Investment. It's used to be called the CDC. They've actually invested in healthcare in Nigeria. I think if you go to Evercare Hospital in Lekki, apologies if I'm making this up, but I feel like I remember seeing, I think then it was a CDC logo, because there's that logo. If you've been there, and they were one of the investors, right? So, but why I mentioned, because now they're called BI, so they're the British government's like DFI that invest in emerging markets. Why I mention them is that if you go to BI and try and dig into their data, you can find, and this is me like exaggerating a little bit because I can't remember the exact thing, so please don't sue me, BI. But you can find something as specific as the number of people that died during project installation of something in Kuwait in the last 10 years. Like, the requirements for data reporting are so meticulous, are so high that oftentimes the people that work with them complain. They're asking us to report too much. And while, yes, there are conversations to be had about, okay, the overhead of that reporting, what it does mean is that there is so much transparency, there's so much accountability that even me as a non-British citizen, I can go and see how this government entity is spending money and how it is making a positive or negative change in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the reason that happens is there's a phrase that when I lived in the UK, there's a phrase that I used to read a lot of news and watch a lot of the news. And there's a phrase I heard over and over again from ordinary people. They'll preface things with, as a taxpayer, there was a sense that because I'm a taxpayer, I can hold the government neck like this and ask for things. And some of the things I thought you are being unreasonable, but they're like, I'm a taxpayer. So the government there has a sense, and it doesn't mean that they behave right. Every government misbehaves. Because it's filled with people are going to misbehave, right? But there's a sense that taxpayers are watching us, are holding us. So there's a culture of oversight. There's a culture of accountability. We don't have that culture. We need to create it, else the infrastructure, even if it is there, like I said, the Nigerian government budget 20 years ago It's just 2 pages. This is what we're spending. Bam.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can see in theory what's each, like the healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
the Ministry of Health budget alone is probably like 300 pages because it has to list all the, I don't know, what's a health center, all its entities under it.
Yeah.
So there's what, so the infrastructure is there, but the culture of going to see is this list that you say you are spending on. Does it make sense? That culture is not there. Then the culture of, okay, you say you are going to rehabilitate this medical center. Okay. I live next door. Every day I pass it, I shrug my shoulders. And we had entities again. I think budget set up something. I think it was tracker. I think that was a tracker NG. And that was what they were supposed to do. That's what they were doing. They were going around tracking. Is the government spending money on the project they said they will spend on? And they will post it, and everybody on Twitter will retweet and say, "Oh Lord, government," and we move on.
Yeah.
Because the culture of holding people, not just governments, but anybody, accountable to how they said they will spend money, except it's your money.
Yeah.
And that's something I don't know if we have time for, but there's a philosophical underlying thing behind this lack of accountability in Nigeria that comes from how that is linked to that as a taxpayer thing.
Yeah.
That's we don't have, right? But just to answer the question, it's a cultural change that is needed. The culture would draw out the infrastructure. Because if the infrastructure is there, but the culture is not there. No. If the culture is there and the infrastructure is not there, it won't work either. But the culture would force the infrastructure to come out, right? Because honestly, like every ministry, every sector has this. There's always this sort of flagship headline policy that the government makes noise about, and the progress being made is opaque. And the thing is that the citizens who come, you listen to some representatives talk about it, and you move on, and there is no culture of genuine interrogation. And if you integrate, they say, yeah, troublesome.
Yeah.
Right. But the truth is that like we should be able to trace every single naira of that 32 billion, not just to the spend, but the outcome.
Yeah.
Because why is disbursement itself an achievement if it does not lead to positive outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So that culture of oversight all the way to outcomes. Going back to your football pitch example, there needs to be somebody reporting that the pitch is not being used.
Yeah.
So there needs to be somebody reporting that, hey, look, you sent 10 million naira to so and so health center. They use it to buy new fridge for the staff or whatever, right? We need that level of oversight. And honestly, that is a culture that goes beyond me and my family, as long as we're okay, right?
Yeah.
And it is changing a little bit,
Yeah.
that I would say, and I'm happy about over the last 5 years. We saw it from 2019 elections.
Yeah.
We've seen, as you said, more civic engagement, but it needs to be more, right? And there are entities that are trying to do this because sometimes people feel a lot of pressure. I'm trying to run my business. I'm trying to take care of my family. You're not asking me to do this. No, I'm not asking you to take it upon yourself. I'm asking you to support the entities that are doing this already.
Yeah.
Like when budget does not pay me anything. I've not even spoken to anybody there in years, but it's like, if you want to say, okay, I want to hold government accountable in terms of how they spend money, there's an entity that has been running for over a decade that is funded by global entities. That is, in fact, now it is in Ghana as well as in other countries. It was so successful that like just support them and they'll do the job for you. But we're not even doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah. And I think just to give credit where credit is due, I think the reason why, because I saw the red letter come out and I was like, oh, this sounds great. Funds are being dispersed. I've known about the BHCPF for ages now. Funds are being dispersed and they're being dispersed to primary healthcare centers. And because I'm in a digital health Nigeria community, and a lot of people that work in healthcare are asking these questions like, okay, when do we see the transparency of the funding? How much is each center getting, et cetera, et cetera? And there was a very, very, very rich discussion about this kind of balance between government needs to do more, but citizenry needs to do more. So I think there's already this discourse of you know, a lot of people are very pessimistic. Like, we've tried, didn't you see what happened, you know, in 2020, etc. But there are people who are like, but we can't not keep trying. And then on the Federal Ministry of Health side, I remember when I was writing a piece a few years back on the primary healthcare landscape in Nigeria, there is a database, and that's why I'm like, there is some infrastructure. There is a database that shows you every single primary healthcare center in Nigeria across all states, and it shows you the status
Yeah.
of whether it's being renovated or whether it's completed or functional, etc. And so the reason why I ask, like, how do we then have this transparency of where is this 32 billion naira being dispersed to, is because there's already a skeleton of infrastructure for even just knowing where
Yeah.
all these health centers are and how functional they are. So I guess my question is it a technical challenge of integrating the data? Is it a political
Don't
challenge? Is
believe
it
it's like there are
Mhm.
technical challenges, but they are
Mhm.
surmountable. Like a lot of the technical challenges that countries like Nigeria face,
Mhm.
it's not, you're not trying to cure cancer,
Yeah.
like with all due respect. So there are technical challenges,
Mhm.
but those are not the blockers,
Mm.
right? That group chat is fantastic,
Mm.
but is that conversation going to leave the group chat
Mm.
and lead to something? So it's the challenges are more, again, go back to the start, sentiments, soft,
Yeah.
cultural, political.
Yeah.
There are, and the thing is, even when there are technical and other hard challenges, the existence of those cultural and political ones make it so much harder.
Yeah.
And that's why you see that in 3 years, China has cured cancer and Nigeria is still trying to build a health center. How can one be happy? Because the Chinese people, they could move like this, but Nigeria, you're trying to just building, you're lambasted with all sorts of friction.
Yeah.
That should not be there.
The case,
Right.
yeah.
So I think that's a really, really, really key aspect of it, right? Yeah, the take the existing infrastructure, build on top of it. If you don't know how, pay somebody that does.
Yeah.
Like it's not, these things that at this point, these things are not as hard.
Yeah.
The challenges are things like financing. Okay, how do we then finance it?
Yeah.
Because who's going to pay for this oversight? So those are things. They are hard questions, but we don't even get halfway to solving them if the willingness and determination
Yeah.
to solve them is there. It's like when you mentioned the group chat, I had the silliest example of, I don't know if you've ever been on like a friend's trip or something, but there's always the joke of you go there and you take a picture. If we finally made it out of the group chat, right? And you ask people, why don't you travel with your friends? And the truth is, yeah, like there's financial reasons and there's also the reasons, but the biggest thing is that you just don't come together enough to move it out of the group chat. Because when that willingness is there, suddenly, okay, the people that can afford it. So when the willingness and determination is there, the challenges that are surmountable, you surmount. The ones that you cannot surmount, you manage them, right? So something does get done. When nothing gets done, it's rarely your technical is that nobody's stepping forward. People are not stepping forward to do it.
So it's like, how do we get the political will out of the group chat?
Yes.
For Nigerian healthcare
And
financing or African healthcare
as you
financing.
said, I agree. Like honestly, because I was in a conference recently. I was on a panel and so there was a government official there, and she said some very interesting things that if the crowd were less polite, they would have started booing him. But I stepped out later and I was speaking to my friend and I was like, I don't agree with his delivery, but I listened to him and I was like, he's saying something very powerful because he's a former private sector guy.
Yeah.
Who's worked in private sector all his life and he's only been in government for the last couple of years. And he was basically hinting, in my own words, look, you have gone inside. You need to start helping yourselves because if you think that the food chain is going to come from inside. And I was like, because a lot of people took it as government passing the buck.
Yeah.
But I got the sense that this man is saying, look, even when government wants to try, they're not going to be fixing these things by themselves. So you need to understand that, as they say, heaven is going to help the man here that helps himself, right?
Yeah.
And that's why that conversation, it was a couple of weeks ago, shifted something in me to really realize, see, we really do need to take another step up and accept that if we do want change, don't need to attack anybody, don't need to fight anybody, don't need to write anybody up, but you need to internalize more responsibility. And if you don't, that's fine. But don't expect change to happen spontaneously. Right? You know, there's a cost to these things. And I've always said, not everybody is willing and not everybody should pay the cost. It's not everybody that fought for civil rights in the US in the early 2020s. Not everybody did it. Right? Some people mad, some people sat in their houses. Right. But we need people who, in their different fields, in their different ways, are willing to count the cost. And the truth is, so far in Nigeria, most times people have done that when there's money involved. And that's why I've big hope in private sector led initiatives, because when there's money involved, people are ready to dine, they're ready to do what, hold government accountable, talk to government, do whatever, right? But when there's no money involved, and again, this is why health gets dicier, because again, it's more than just money involved. It then gets a bit harder to encourage or get people to step out of their little bubble, myself included, to drive change.
And so I want to conclude with our cure question. So at the cure, we always ask every guest a version of the same question, because it helps to pull everything we've discussed into one vision. What do you think it will take to revolutionize the business model for healthcare in Africa, especially through the lens of data transparency, management, and evidence-based data-driven decision making? In other words, what is the cure for the opacity or the inefficiency that often define the system today?
That's a really good question. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the combined answer, actually. I think one of the ways I think about it is, we spoke about demographic dividend earlier. One thing that Africa has that could be a potential benefit is scale. It has just many people, many things. Scale is a strength or an asset when you get your unit economics right. As per, on each person, you're making, even if it's $0.000001. Because then when you scale it out, suddenly it's fantastic, right? I think for me, using that approach, it would be, how do we drive down the unit economics of healthcare delivery? Right? And specifically, not just any kind of healthcare delivery, but the kind that leads to sustainably positive outcomes. Because a lot of healthcare delivery, unfortunately, in Africa is putting plasters over gunshot wounds. So you need to come back. And it just means that you're recycling, like money is being spent without actually finding a solution, just papering over the crack, right? So it's, how do we drive down the unit economics of healthcare delivery that is sustainable in Africa? And the thing is that if somebody's thinking about that and thinking, oh, that's an easy thing to answer, it's not. Because I believe in value chains. And to do that, I feel you need to look at every aspect of the healthcare financing value chain and the healthcare delivery value chain, right? Because to drive down those unit economics, you have to identify, okay, which parts of the value chain should I even look at more or less? Which parts are more malleable? Because there's some parts that you can be banging your head against and like, that part's not going to change, right? So, and once you identify those parts, then, okay, how do you change them? And hopefully you change them and we can drive down the unit economics. I'll use a few random examples to illustrate what I mean by this. One of the costs of healthcare delivery is I'll say accessing it. Telehealth addresses that by making sure that people do not need to always physically be in the same location as their consultant. Right. That addresses one aspect of the healthcare delivery value chain to reduce the cost. That allows people to serve more people and then in theory encourages more people to invest in healthcare. Right. That's an example. Another example is, and I'm trying to be as practical as possible. So we spoke about what did I just say?
Reducing unit economics. Yes.
Telehealth.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, I mentioned Helium Health. I'll mention them again because I
Mhm.
don't know anyone else who's digitizing
Mm-hmm.
medical health records. It's expensive in terms of time and money,
Yeah.
transferring health records
Mm-hmm.
or failing to do so and just restarting each time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, it's expensive, whether or not we see the money, it's
Mhm.
expensive making healthcare decisions, either as a doctor or patients without the right records.
Yeah.
Right. So the cost of healthcare service in places like Nigeria is higher because we don't have as good records,
Mm-hmm.
at least patient records. So if you make those better,
Mm-hmm.
you reduce the cost a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. We could keep tackling. So I looked at delivery in a
Mhm.
couple of aspects. Let's look at the financing value chain.
Mm-hmm.
Let me even use an example that is so outlandish, but shows just how you have. I think it's important to look at every part of the
Mm-hmm.
value chain. There's few healthcare facilities that you're going to build that will not have some physical elements,
Yeah.
right? Everything needs cement.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of cement relative to income in places like Nigeria is very high.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that if I'm building any kind of medical facility, my relative cost is already higher, right? That has an impact on investors because they're like, okay, then I need a return to be high to make up for it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's one example on the financing side, right? So it's like, okay, how do we reduce the cost of construction or
Mhm.
of cement, right? And you have people in different parts of the world doing things like, okay, can we 'cause I've heard of some super interesting things like, can we have like portable medical centers? Can you have like
Mm.
almost like retractable medical cities that, all
Mhm.
sorts of things that people are trying to, I'm like, I don't know if that will work here, but
Yeah.
again, what they're trying to do is they're tackling specific aspects of the value chain to
Yeah.
try and reduce the unit cost, right? So that's really it. And when you look at people who are doing innovative things, that's
Mhm.
often what they're doing.
Yeah.
They identified an area and then they're trying to either do it in a much cheaper way or in a
Mhm.
much more efficient way. Therefore, the unit cost is more expensive, right?
Yeah.
Is lower, right? So if we can do that, the reason I'm so bullish on that is
Mhm.
because of our scale,
Yeah.
right? Once you get your unit economics right, then the demographic dividends becomes a
Yeah.
dividend.
It pays off.
Pays off, right?
Yeah.
Because you have millions or hundreds of millions of people
Yeah.
to sell to in different ways, right? Or
Mhm.
to service in different ways, right? So for me, that's a big transformation. And I hope what I've shown is that it's a thematic transformation,
Mhm.
but what it looks like can vary,
Yeah.
right? And that's good because we have options,
Mm.
right? But the last thing that I'll just say is people need to understand that value chains are interactive.
Mhm.
So what that means is sometimes when you attack one part of the value chain and change it
Mhm.
and improve it, it has a knock-on effect somewhere else on the value chain. So you
Mm.
need to have another look, right?
Yeah.
Else you're wondering, why did it not work? Oh, because you did this and this thing, this
Yeah.
other thing changed,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah. Interesting. And this has just been an amazing conversation. And when you mentioned the dividends, the demographic dividends, I think Africa is also in a position where when we think about unit economics of healthcare, a lot of healthcare spend gets really expensive when you're treating too late. But with aging populations, you have the challenge that if you haven't gotten your prevention strategy right, you're reaping the cost of a lot of chronic disease that could have been prevented. But where Africa stands demographically, there is an opportunity, if we play our cards right, to lean on preventive medicine in a way like never before, learn from other regions, Western regions. And preventive medicine is always better and cheaper and more cost effective than curative medicine. So there is also that aspect of when you think about reducing the unit economics of healthcare delivery in Africa. So, I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation. I always like to end with rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So this is where we ask a question, a few quick rapid fire questions, and you answer in short answers, 1 or 2 sentences, first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. If you had to choose one data set or metric to track the continent's progress over the next decade, what would it be?
Exchange rates against the US dollar.
Really? Even though we had that conversation about sentimentality and
Because it still is. It's yeah.
yeah.
Because everyone said
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It,
Okay,
it
okay.
still is the easiest, simplest proxy.
Okay, okay. Next rapid fire. What is one misconception about Africa's economy or investment landscape that you wish more people understood?
Africa, investing in Africa
Mm-hmm.
is less risky than people who say African investing is too risky is,
Mm,
but investing in Africa is more risky than people who say investing in Africa is not risky. Is
interesting. So the
yes.
risk lies somewhere in the middle.
Yes, and crucially, it's misunderstood. The nature of the risk is misunderstood.
Okay,
Yes.
interesting. Next one. What's one metric that's trending in a direction that you didn't expect?
Hmm. Hmm. So I'm happy that I'm struggling to think because it surely means that
You're
okay,
getting
it's
all your
coming by
predictions
surprise.
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't think of
So that means all your
anything.
predictions are
It's
top
just yes.
notch.
So you usually have expectations. I
Mm-hmm.
can't maybe if I had more time to go through
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, but
Mm-hmm.
right now, yeah, like particularly the major ones, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Okay, that's good. That's
expected.
good news. And finally, the last question: what gives you the most hope right now?
Nigerians, right?
Mm.
I struggle with Nigerians. We are really terrible people, but we are very enterprising,
Mm-hmm.
and again, not always a good thing, but
Mm.
again, it just means that just all we need is a sliver of opportunity, and
Yeah.
once people see potential to benefit from it, then suddenly things move, right? So,
Yeah.
and we've seen it in how industries have emerged from gone from 0 to 100 in
Mm-hmm.
5 years, right? So it's
Mm.
that enterprising nature. It's so much of a cliche, but it's such an asset. And when you engage with people outside the country, they recognize it as an asset, right?
Mm.
And sometimes they get scared of Nigeria. So like you part too much, your energy is
You
too
guys do
much.
too
You
much.
guys do too much, right? But for us, we're so used to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hopefully we can get the right opportunities and deploy it in the right ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you for such an insightful conversation. I think I told you this earlier. You're our only non healthcare guest this season, but you really held your own and reminded us that data, transparency, trust are just as critical to curing the system as the medicine itself. And this was the kind of clarity that we need when we're talking seriously about transforming healthcare. So I really, really appreciate today's conversation. For any of our listeners and watchers, you can follow Steers on their social media platforms and their website. And don't forget to subscribe to The Cure and share this episode with a data nerd. Thank you and see you in the next episode. Bye.